Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. My name is Pilar and I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant, a company where we help managers of remote teams to get the most out of online collaboration. You can find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com. Hello and welcome to episode 338 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. And this is a What's Going On episode. So hello from me, Pilar Orti. And of course, for a What's Going On episode, let's say hello to Maya Middlemiss.
Hello, Pilar. Hello, everyone listening.
We'll continue with this episode, which is due to air in October. We're going to continue this thing we're experimenting with, which is commenting on some of the themes that have emerged and definitely elaborate on some of the themes from the previous episode, which will have been an interview. And the last episode we did was 337 with both Tammy and Theresa Hollemer. We talked there about career progression in remote teams and in international teams. So before we get on to that, I'm going to do the calls to action today at the beginning, Maya, because I always forget. So if you want to say anything to us, you can head over to virtualnotdistant.com. There's a contact form. You can email me directly. And thank you. Thank you so much for those who are emailing through, because it really makes a difference. Pilar at virtualnotdistant.com. And also, if you go to virtualnotdistant.com, you can sign up to our monthly newsletter of recommendations, both audio and reading. Yes, listening and reading recommendations, although I have to say that September was a bit mad. So I think it's the first time I've skipped a newsletter without warning. I was feeling so guilty.
Oh, I know that feeling.
Yes, I'm sure people will be all right. Right, so some of the points from the conversation with Tammy and Theresa, of course, Maya, it's always great to have you here, regardless of what we're talking about. But of course, you are now building this movement, or I don't know, you can tell us what you're calling it, called Remote Work Europe. So you, I think, are very much in touch with what is going on with people who are looking for remote work, either as freelancers or in organizations. So I think let's place that context beforehand, because I think especially for new listeners or listeners who've only caught up with us recently, it'd be nice to know what it is you're doing, because I think that will help also the conversation. So tell us about Remote Work Europe then.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to do that. And Remote Work Europe, yeah. Well, it started as Remote Work Spain almost 2 years ago now. It was just when we were coming out of lockdown, and a lot of people had their first experience of working remotely, and we were sort of coming out of that and trying to get on with our lives. And I saw a post on Facebook. Somebody posted it. It was in a local community group of a few hundred people saying, "I've been working from home. I really like it, but now I'm looking for other work I can do from home. Does anyone know anything?" And I think I was just in a real hurry that day, because I didn't have time to write the reply to say, this is a really stupid place and way to ask that. This is not how to use social media to learn about remote work and find opportunities. And I sort of came back to it afterwards and thought, actually, most people haven't got a clue. If they just had a little bit of experience of working from home, or it's something they've always wanted to do, there's a lot of us in that remote space already who are talking to each other, and we're building the conversation and sharing the most amazing research, like the interviews. We're going to reflect on it. But there's this whole other bunch of people who don't know about that. And the gap really between them and us is so vast. And I wanted to help more people step into that space and offer some more information and community. And I was aware that there's an awful lot going on for digital nomads now. That's been the one thing that's seriously exploded post-COVID, and all power to it. But there's a whole other load of people who, they might not be living where they were born or near where their work is, or they don't want to be, but they don't necessarily want to keep moving around and going to pop-up co-livings and things like that. They just want to be able to live in a location-independent way where they choose, and they need information about those places. So that's why remote work Spain just started exploding and growing, and people wanting jobs, freelancers seeking new opportunities and gigs, people wanting to share learning. We do have a newsletter, and we do curate a range of remote employment and freelance opportunities in there every Friday, which we specifically choose to be open to European residents because so many are not. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, obviously, those 30 gigs in there are not necessarily going to match somebody's CV and skill set. So we encourage people to use them as examples of what's out there, as examples of what companies are hiring, what jobs boards to look for, what search filters to apply, and to just try and build your skills and level up and find the right opportunity for you. We try to provide information and networking to support that. And we started to grow because Spain we were getting lots of people in the Spain group saying, is there a group for where I live? Because this is really great, but I live in Germany or wherever. And it's like, well, no. And I don't know anything about the laws on self-employed taxes in France. And so I started to recruit other country administrators to build up sister communities, if you like. So we share a mailing list, but there are different Facebook communities growing. And the biggest one so far is the UK, which started in July, I think. And she's just passed 2,000 members.
Wow.
And that's growing strongly. And we also have communities coming up in Germany, Ireland, Sweden, and Italy with fantastic country moderators. Again, they're mostly people who are living on their patch, so they know it and they can answer questions. They can bin out any spammy stuff, any dodgy, there's so many bogus remote work opportunities out there, which are just data grabs or worse. And they can form partnerships with local providers and people who know what they're doing to advise on things like immigration and tax.
Yeah, because I see then that you're covering both the freelancers who I think before the COVID used to make up a big part of the remote work population, but also you're also covering people who are just looking for remote work employment in organizations. So I think that's really interesting because it gives you that overview.
Yeah, I just don't think it's necessarily quite the rigid dichotomy that it used to be. I think we're heading for much more of a blend, and it might be a case of finding something you can do, something you're good at, somewhere you can add value, and it might be advertised as employment, but you might be able to negotiate a contracting arrangement for it, for example, or a fractional role in an organization that doesn't require 100% of your time. So I think because I really believe in that as a way of creating our own portfolio careers in the time and place that we want to, I want to encourage everybody to maybe try not to put themselves into, I need a job, I'm an employee, or I'm strictly a freelancer and I won't commit long term to any organization, and try and look for where the match is between what you've got to offer and what somebody needs and will pay for, because the sweet spot could be anywhere really, and it's quite a spectrum.
I think that flexibility in that area is also really important, and hopefully something that we'll start talking about, because the flexibility has so far been mainly about location, sometimes about schedule, but we know that sharing roles, part-time versus full-time, again, maybe freelancing for a while, or maybe contracting, or maybe full-time for a while, and shorter-term contracts and stuff like that. I think that's great. And technology and the fact that we can work remotely enables and supports all of that. So that makes sense. Actually, we'll stay with this. Let's stay with this freelancing thing, because actually when I was talking to both Tammy and Theresa, we were looking at remote work within organizations. And of course, we didn't go into the freelancing thing. Well, the freelancer or the job searching. So we looked at it more from the point of view of individuals who are already in organizations. But for example, one of the first things that Tammy said about remote work in organizations and just career progression for remote workers in general is that there are not many remote jobs. And I have to say, I live a little bit away from that arena because my focus is just on what is happening in organizations. So is that the case? Are there not that many remote jobs around?
I think the trouble is employment law is still a very localized issue. It's certainly, at least at the national level or at the state level in the US, and therein lies a whole other thing. There are remote jobs, but finding them, the ones that are truly globally remote, is incredibly difficult. And there's an awful lot of misuse of the word remote for a start, and it actually turns out to be hybrid. So you dig into it. So you can live anywhere, provided you're prepared to come to one place once a week or something. I thought, well, that's not remote, that's hybrid. I mean, things like LinkedIn and Indeed have now got filters for remote, but it relies on the hirer to set those filters correctly for the vacancy they're advertising. So there is a shortage of remote roles. There's a shortage of entry-level remote roles, definitely, because a lot of the people we're working with in Remote Work Europe have never worked remotely before. So we do have to say, you may need to take a step sideways or even backwards into something a little bit more junior to prove yourself to be trusted and hired in a remote role. But actually finding those more junior positions is really hard because they don't have that trust established in somebody. So we look at the analytics from the newsletter, and it's things like customer service, marketing roles, anything that people can think, I've got transferable skills from somewhere else that I can bring to this. Those jobs are like gold dust. And I agree with Tammy that they are in short supply. I think there's still a lack of imagination amongst employers. And even when they do want to offer them remotely, they tend to do so on a very localized basis. And it's the very few roles that are actually genuinely, we will hire you wherever you are in the world. We will figure out the best way to write a contract between us, but we just want the best person. Those are very rare. And they tend to be amazing employers or really specialized, incredibly niche, unrecruitable positions.
Yeah, I think that we need to start identifying remote global versus remote. Because for me, remote just means I can work from anywhere, but maybe in my town. I might not want to move. It's interesting that when we're saying there's not enough remote jobs, does it mean that there's not enough remote jobs or that there's not enough remote global?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, like the majority of people, don't want to travel outside. I mean, they don't need to travel, but what they don't want is to have to, if you live in Cambridge, to have to go to London every day.
Yes.
That's. But I think that because of this new thing no, it's not a new thing, because now the word hybrid has come into play, then they really aren't remote because you have to be in the office. It's not location independent because they're asking you to be in a certain location a couple of times a week.
Again, it's a spectrum. There's the fully remote at one end and the fully co-located at the other represent two extremes. And it's that mess in the middle that you have to figure out when you're looking at, this looks like a really interesting vacancy. And just occasionally you will find out that they really are truly globally remote and they want to hire the best person on the planet, and they will use whatever combination of entities from a business point of view in order to do that. But then, the competition for those roles will be astronomical because there are so few of them around. And even digging down to that level, quite often deep within the job ad, it will be, it's 100% fully remote vacancies, and it's within one US state. That's the only place they can hire. And it's kind of frustrating because there are companies that do hire globally. We know it can be done. We know that there are structures, there are things that can help you, like EORs or foreign direct employment services. And they're all trying to overcome these barriers, but they do create complexity. And you can also see it from the hirer's point of view, that they just want, well, actually, if we just hire someone locally under a local employment contract that we've been using for years, we know how it works, we know what it costs us, because to use these other entities often costs more. And you can see it from their point of view as well. Or the other thing is they force them to become a self-employed contractor rather than offering any kind of reassurance of an employment contract.
Yeah, I think with hiring internationally also brings a set of complexities, like Theresa, who added her comments at the end of 337, is that you also then have all the cultural aspects of it. And you need to, if you do want to hire globally, you need to know why you're wanting to hire globally rather than just in your country. Also, put the time in to make sure that you're in what eventually is going to become an international team can operate as an international team. So that's it's a business decision. It's the same as it's now becoming a decision. Like we can't assume that every country just wants to employ people in their country. but they might make the decision that they do, but they need to make it explicit as well, because it affects the company culture.
Yes, it's a moving target and continues to be. But I suppose what I want with Remote Work Europe is to bring the bottom-up conversation to the table and try and get people talking about it and asking for it and challenging the obvious and thinking about what they want and where they have to go for it. And maybe that can help create change as well. I think change from the organizational side is, they want, as Theresa pointed out, there is a cost, there's a friction to employing people in different countries and different time zones, different languages, different cultures, but you can get so many benefits from that. So they'll make a decision based on the business case, and then it's up to the individual to try and find people who are kind of moving in the same direction as them and want the same things and fit into it. But it's really complicated, and I don't know whether we'll look back in 20 years once it's all sorted out and we have sort of universal digital nomad visas and passports and employment regulations. But at the moment, it's a mess, and it's navigating it is a challenge.
Yeah, I think if you're looking for work or you're looking to change jobs, it is complicated. So I think I was going to say blah, blah, blah. Just wondered where to go with this. So we've got one of the issues is you mentioned, and something I hadn't thought of, is the junior entry. I think it was Tammy that mentioned that actually a lot of more senior leaders have always had the flexibility that we associate with remote roles, which is being able to work from home when you need, blah, blah, and a little bit more of, and actually a lot of people, maybe especially those who travel in more senior roles, will have been doing some kind of remote work without even realizing it. Junior entry is something, because from the career progression point of view, I just wonder whether learning to work remotely is something that people will have to learn on the job. Which, if you're looking for a remote role but you've never worked on it,
it's a bit of a catch-22, isn't it? I think there are people that I have advised to, if they want to transition into remote work and they find the right organization or the right kind of role, that they might have to do some in-person work first and to think longer term. If you can build some credibility and track record, either with an employer or in a particular role, face-to-face, and then try and take it remote. If you know that they have the potential for that, but they just can't rely on you to do that yet because you've got no track record of it. On the other hand, I think there are people who definitely need to accentuate what they bring and what experience they have got. People aren't putting it on their CVs as a skill, as an experience that, practically everybody got a taste of it during the pandemic. So what did you learn about how to manage yourself and your time, your technology, how to multitask, how to motivate yourself? These are all things people need to talk about more and emphasize, because they could make the difference between whether somebody sees you as remote ready or not.
That's such a great point. And talking about that career progression, whether inside or looking for inside an organization or looking after a job, is to take time to realize what it is that you are good at as a remote employee.
Yeah.
Because again, remote employee now just means very little.
Yes.
Are you great because you thrive in an asynchronous environment? Or are you great because you are the master at facilitating online meetings in your team? Or are you great because all you need is for someone to allocate a task to you and you're off?
Yeah.
How are you a great remote worker?
Personalities, yes, and such different skill sets. And we need to help people really audit that and think about what they love doing as well, because I think remote can be seen as such a goal, such an aspiration that you do sometimes, I see people posting in Remote Work Europe, and I have to say, you sound so desperate. This isn't serving you well. You need to think about what you actually want, not just, please, I'll do anything if I can stay remote. Because for a start, you're going to get deluged with DMs from scammers, but you're not presenting yourself well. What can you bring to the table? And when people are hiring remotely, then you're literally going to be up against hundreds, if not thousands, of other applicants. So you have to think about what you offer, and that needs to start with, what do you love? What are you good at? Knowing yourself and your personality, what feeds you, what inspires you, what motivates you, as opposed to what drains you. And yeah, as you said, there are so many different ways that can that can apply within remote. It's not enough to say that you're good at remote work.
Yeah. I wonder as well whether understanding what that remote label is giving us as individuals and why we're searching for it can also be quite interesting, because different people look for remote work for different reasons, like all the way from I want a remote role because I like working from home to the other end of the line because I like remote work because it means I don't have to have a permanent home.
Yes.
So all the way. And I think that sometimes still, I'm going to go out on a limb here, but still there might be a suspicious of why you want to be remote. Is it because you don't want to be micromanaged, or what is it? Sometimes I think that understanding that and even communicating that, if relevant, of course, might also be quite an interesting way of advocating for that.
Yes, and showing that you've thought about it and that you really get it and you understand the challenges of the remote manager as well, what you're asking them to give you in terms of trust and support and supervision, to show that you've thought about their point of view and what you need or don't need from them, that you can be an asset for their team and they can rely on you to do that, even if they're never going to set eyes on you.
Yeah, because all of this that we are forgetting in a way when we're talking about whether companies are offering remote work or not and what the remote work landscape is like. And I think we're forgetting about all the advocacy that still needs to be done. Because unfortunately, what seems to have happened after the pandemic is that, okay, there was a lot of advocacy about remote work in small pockets. Then the fact that it can be done and we're at a place with technology where we can get rid of a lot of the things that we thought would be a problem. And then on the other side, we've had this flooding of news about companies like even Zoom saying you have to be in the office X days. And we've got to forget about the fact that we're fighting how many days we have to be in the office, because actually there are reasons for a lot of people looking for this kind of work. And there are skills that have been developed as well in order to achieve this kind of work. And I think that this conversation has been lost in how many days do I need to be in the office?
Yeah, and we forgot to ask why as well. Is this about, an off-the-shelf policy, or because you've got this long lease that you need to justify, or is there a serious reason? We had one came up in the Remote Work Spain group this week, as somebody asking that they have a holiday property in Spain, but their employer won't let them work from Spain for 2 weeks. And is there some visa or permission they can get from Spain? And of course, there's no fortnight visa. It doesn't exist. But, the reasons their employer is saying that could be related to so many things, including sort of data security, IP tracking. If we start to unpick the why, there might be a way through it. And it also we might be able to drill down a little bit and address the why in some other way. It's a bit like things like time zones. Somebody might say, well, we need what we really need is people who are going to be able to work in the European time zone. But then they advertise the job saying you must live in Europe or this time zone. And actually, the work could just as easily be done by somebody on the other side of the world who has a slightly different body clock or is happy to. And so it opens it up. But what they've done is kind of narrow it down. And it's just, if people are honest about the why, then we can look realistically at whether there's a way through or not. But if they're just being lazy and saying it's easier for us to work with somebody who might come to a meeting once a year, so we'd rather hire in this city or something.
I think being honest about the why also allows the person applying to decide whether they take it or not. Because it could be that they say, well, we don't want to. They go, well, okay, fine. I'll stay where I am and
that's
whatever.
So important.
Or it could be that they think the why, well, I think that's a good why. I'll take the job even if it's not giving me the flexibility that I want. But actually,
I can see why. And it makes sense to me. And I'm prepared to move and compromise, because this whole thing of trust and checking the other side out applies just as much the other way around when you're not going to an interview face-to-face in a corporate HQ and shaking someone's hand and looking in their eyes. It's a big step for the employee or the freelancer as well before they commit to work with that person. So they're also making a choice, ideally, hopefully, and not just being so desperate for anything that lets them work remotely.
I am wondering whether the remote work and this ability that people have discovered. Some people thought they would never be able to work remotely. Now they've realized they can, and they've realized it's got benefits. And now the next step might be, well, can this be something I do as a freelancer?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering whether the increase in remote work has also opened up a little bit more the freelancing arena, as in more people thinking, well, I could freelance. And on the flip side, more organizations going, actually, yeah, contracting, freelancing, great. If we only need someone for a few months, we don't need to give them office space. We can just contract them. So I wouldn't know where to look at this, but do you think that freelancing is increasing or has the potential to increase?
Oh, definitely. I mean, kind of, I would say that, I know, but it's got to be true. I mean, if you just even look at the tech industries, the amount of layoffs that's happened in the last 18 months or so has put so many talented people back into seeking work. And we're looking at hirers with tighter budgets. So it's going to make far more sense. A lot of those people don't want to go back into full-time work anyway, and they can hire out and really professionalize freelancing and freelance on their own terms, whether they describe themselves as an interim or a consultant or something like a fractional executive long-term. There are so many different ways now. And really it's kind of makes more sense than the other way around, because I don't know where we decided that you had to divide up profitable activities in 40-hour chunks and bundle them up into a job description. It makes much more sense to say, well, actually, those 3 things is best done by this person, and therefore we only need them for 3 hours a week, or we only need them for this 12-week sprint of a product launch or something, and then we don't actually need that particular task anymore. So if people really know what they need, then they can hire and bring in the very best talent rather than trying to get an all-rounder. I mean, I see it a lot as a writer and content creator. You see roles at organizations and you think, I'd really like to work there, if I was looking for a full-time job and sort of playing fantasy land. But actually you look at the role and you think that would be an amazing place to work for. And then you look at all the things they want you to do. And some of those I know I'm really, really good at because that's what I specialize in and that's what I offer. And so, yes, I'd love to do their long form content, their ebooks and their lead magnets and things like that. And then you get onto, and you have to do social media and you have to do email drip and you have all these things. And I'm thinking those are completely different skills. And actually, I can do them. They're not my strength. And it just wouldn't make sense. And then you look what they're paying for the whole job and you think you're going to get somebody who can just about do all of those things. You're not going to get anybody who's brilliant at any of them. And if you just looked at all those things separately and then went out and found the best freelancer, you'd probably still save budget because they do it so much more efficiently rather than having someone sat on payroll between campaigns where they might not be as active. And people who conflate sort of writing with things like SEO and stuff like that, I don't know about that. I'll work with your SEO person and work from their brief, but it's they couldn't write and they're not the same. Whereas people tend to think, okay, we need a sort of all-round marketing content type person and we'll create a full-time position and resource it at a medium level. And it's frustrating sometimes because I see places I'd love to work and know I could make a real difference, but they don't have any flexibility to rethink how they manage that whole process.
It's almost like because you are thinking that you need someone full-time, you've got to to fill in their hours instead of chunking it out.
Why don't we give them this as well? They could do that too, and we'll bung in a few more social media accounts or something to make it look like a full-time role. And maybe there is a sense that they want to then sort of own you with a non-compete or whatever and not have you work for anywhere else. Maybe that's a sense of threat. But you can make agreements with freelancers who work with your competitors and are very aware of their responsibilities and accountabilities. So I don't know what it is, but it feels like it's just one more hangover from sort of the Industrial Revolution that we measure out work in these chunks, and that's gone into employment law now. So we have to fill up a full-time role or advertise it very specifically as a fractional 0.3 role or something in some public sector vacancies.
Yeah, there's also it's the same as remote. I see so many parallels in that it's also something that the people who could offer these who will design these freelance roles, they've never freelanced themselves. So again, it's another thing of, well, how would that work? I haven't got a clue. And it's that, so I think that it's still, everything is still quite rigid.
Yes.
And it still means that a lot of the people who could make decisions to start to shift things have not experienced it, because we haven't all experienced everything.
Yeah, and that's legitimate.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we probably need to remember on the other side of it, well, actually, this is going to create overhead and friction. We can say, oh, why don't you do it like that? But actually, they're far more used to just giving a job description to HR and they come back and say, here's your new whatever. And they don't have to think about managing those different processes and breaking it down and how long it's really going to take and what the budget is for each bit and managing 7 people where they could have just 1 employee. So I totally understand that it's just like the people who've never learned how to lead and manage remotely because they didn't have to do it till 2020. And suddenly it's really hard for them, even if they're pretty senior in what they already do.
The other complexity, I think, about freelancing is that for the freelancers, what sometimes it's just not. For some people, it's like, no, where am I going there? That's like, I want to do my job, whatever that is, writing, whatever, but I don't want to have to deal with everything else. So I just want to bring in another voice just for a minute or two. It's, I was talking to Sondre Rasch from Safetywing. He's one of the founders and he's the CEO, who, of course, have been in the remote digital nomad space for ages. In fact, earlier when you were talking about one of the difficulties of that person who was going to be for 2 weeks in Madrid, I immediately thought insurance. Who covers it? How do you cover? How easy is it for either? And of course, Safetywing have been doing insurance for digital nomads. Now they do for remote workers, etc. But anyway, I was recording for this show, talking about other stuff, and he mentioned how difficult it is sometimes to freelance, to be a freelancer. And anyway, I'm just going to stick his voice in here so that everyone can hear what he had to say.
When it comes to recommending to other countries, what I most tell them is that this freelancer self-employed option is growing and they should make it more orderly because more people are doing it. So today, in most countries, when you're self-employed, it's very much up to you. Like you kind of treat it like a regular company, like accounting, paying taxes, etc. I think they should try to make this individual self-employed option more orderly so that, maybe things like monthly deduction of taxes, and just making it much more straightforward so it's easy to do. Because I do see that people who go that route and have to set up their own entity and things like that, it's just a lot to figure out. You sort of have to learn company law and accounting a little bit. And it shouldn't be like that. It should be much more easy to just opt in. I am glad that some companies are making services like Solo that makes this a little bit easier. But here we're still in the early days. If I were to guess how this would develop in the future, I don't think the EUR option, the kind of paying for an employer to kind of staffing company to that is local will succeed in the end because it's so expensive. And you drag along all the kind of errors of each individual country as well. Like people don't realize how amazingly complex labor law in places like Greece or Brazil are. Like it's way off the charts of what anyone can imagine. So I do think that the self-employed will continue to be the preferred option, but that it should be improved and strengthened given more order because it will be a more significant part of the economy than it was in the past.
So we've been talking about what countries had to think about when starting to legislate for remote, and he went on to actually what we need to be thinking about also is how countries need to create and nurture the freelance ecosystem, because Maya, I mean, being a freelancer in the UK is really easy.
Yeah.
It's really easy. It's easy to start up. There's you don't have to register for VAT until you hit a certain threshold. You don't need to form a limited. Accounts, to be honest, are quite simple. If you're if you're not hitting numbers, you can even start working and register 6 months after you started. It's so easy. But Spain...
Oh, God, it's complete opposite. And of course, you get people coming from the UK over to Spain thinking, well, I'll just freelance. How hard can it be?
Yeah, because
I'll just consult to my old employer. Nothing will change.
Yeah, because you've got... Do you still need... you need to register for VAT, no? Like in the Netherlands.
Yes. Yeah, straight away. There's no VAT allowance like there is in the UK. The first cent, if it's a within Spain, or it's a qualifying sale, which it usually is, and you might need to be retaining income tax from that person. Or there's all sorts of complexities, which is why I do everything through my Estonian limited company, pretty much, because I just can't get my head around that. But that's another layer of complexity. And all of this is for anybody thinking they'll just swap their current job employed role for freelancing does need to be aware that it's going to add a whole layer of stuff anyway, even before you go to another country and try and figure out the rules there and how to be compliant and safe and not attract huge fines. Like, as you were saying, in the UK, you don't have to register straight away. You can kind of experiment a bit and see if you've got a freelancing business that's going to earn any taxable money, and then register retrospectively if you're actually making a profit. Whereas in Spain, you're supposed to do it before you do your first hour of freelancing. And you have to kind of show on paper that that's how the way around that you did it. And the high social security payments that, of course, employees never see, because that's all done at source. But then suddenly you're responsible for that, and for budgeting for tax, which is going to be quarterly rather than monthly, and all of those things that people often don't think about. And yes, of course, things like health insurance. If you're moving around, you might be paying social security somewhere, but it's not going to cover you if you have an accident on the other side of the world, or your laptop gets stolen or whatever. So much to think about for this privilege of working and living the way we want to do.
Yeah, but Sondre had such a great point that actually having lots of freelancers and entrepreneurs is not a bad thing for a society as well. And that I've never understood why Spain made it so difficult.
Yeah.
And I think, if I remember, I think they did make it a little bit easier recently, as in I think you had to pay quite a lot per month, even if you weren't invoicing. But I think that came down a little bit, or at least for new people. So...
Yeah, there are on-ramps for the first year. They've made the lowest minimum quota slightly more flexible depending on income, but it's still not very progressive. If you're on a low income, you'll be paying a big chunk of your income in social security. I think it's supposed to kind of broaden out, later on. And you need to obviously do your whole sums depending on lifestyle things and how you want to live, and what your cost of living is going to be, and all sorts of things before you decide it's a really bad deal. I think of it for me as a really good deal, because I'm supporting a family of 4 with that social security payment. But if I was on a low income and a single person, it might look like a terrible deal if I was giving away a quarter of my income every month in social security, and I never got sick, and maybe I'm not planning to be here at retirement, so I'll never use whatever few cents of that is going into the pension pot. So it might look like terrible value. But I suppose that's the only upside to that, is now that maybe you don't have to live here. You could go and choose to do your remote work somewhere else. But it's when people kind of think, oh, I'll just go to Spain and freelance. It's going to be the same as it is in the UK or somewhere else. And no, you do need advice on that whole picture.
And that, in a way, is part of the hurdles to grow as a freelancer as well. Right. So we've completely complemented rather than built on, which is great, on episode 337, because I think that this thing, to be honest, when I started in the remote space not many years ago, 2015, whenever, remote was equated to freelancing. Yeah. Like if you talked about remote, whereas of course it's one part of the ecosystem. But again, it's another thing that as certain ways of working become more acceptable, then others' ways of working will also become more acceptable.
Yeah, and things are changing on the structural front as well, slowly. We're different ways of freelancing or employing internationally, and things are coming along that just didn't exist a few years ago because the demand wasn't there.
Whoever is looking at making some kind of life change, it's at that moment that you need to check where everything is, like legislation-wise and stuff, because this stuff is moving so quickly. It's moving almost as quickly as some of the technology and the tools that we use. Which I just wanted to segue Maya into this note from Microsoft, but before we do that, Is there anything else that you wanted to mention about the Tammy's and Theresa's contributions before we start to wrap up? Because we've gone on for a while.
We have. I would just urge everyone to go and check out those interviews because they're really insightful. And for me, particularly as a long-term freelancer, it's always really interesting to hear what's going on in the big organizations. And I think it was particularly insightful from that point of view for me, the questions about career progression and staying within an organization and growing your visibility and moving on in your career. Whereas I tend to think like a freelancer, well, I just hop to the next thing. And you know, it shouldn't have to be like that.
Yeah, it's very different as well. I mean, it's always been different to progress freelancing or within an organization. But as someone who has an identity as a remote worker or someone who wants to pursue that, it is very different how the remote world of work works within organizations, especially the larger ones, and how it works in the more nimble space, which is where you tend to find the fully distributed organizations as well. So again, this is, I always think, in a way, I feel we need less vocabulary, and in a way, I feel we need more vocabulary. So less of this
less jargon. Yeah.
Yes. I was thinking the other day, I saw someone, I think it was Samit, post on LinkedIn a photo of hybrid work is remote work, and remote work is just work. And I remember the first person I interviewed, which was you, Maya, for Virtual Not Distant, before we even had a podcast. And at the end of it, we're like, wouldn't it be great if we no longer talked about virtual work? Because actually virtual work, virtual teamwork is just teamwork. We're like, yeah. And here we are, many years
still talking about it.
Still talking about it. And even hearing myself thinking, well, we need different terms for remote, global, and remote. Anyway. Yeah. So on the other hand, so it's something just supporting this, and this still being a what's going on episode, I just wanted to reflect on the war in a way, or the competition, or the ever-evolving business models around technology that is supporting all of our remote work. And I have to say, I received an email from Microsoft, because I've got a Microsoft account. You've been chosen for a special offer. Search with Bing on Microsoft Edge for 5 times within 14 days and earn 1 free entry into the 4,000 sweepstakes. It was not spam.
It's astonishing, though, as a piece of marketing. Wow.
Yes. And I just thought, oh, wow, the real, we're all here while we're saying, we want remote to be an online collaboration and working through technology to be the norm and so high profile. And then behind there's all these people, all these organizations really trying to pull you in. I found it fascinating.
Yeah, I suppose it's just for us as remote workers or freelancers to try and remember what we're worth to these platforms and these tools, and be conscious about how we let them use us while we use them. Because if it's actually worth them giving away thousands in a sweepstake to make you switch search engine, that's pretty revealing.
And we're only talking search engines, with all the technology that is being developed. And then we come right back to, what search engine are you using? And we want you to use our search engine. I think, wow, fascinating.
Yeah. Surely Bing lost that one a while ago anyway, let's face it. They want to double down on their Copilot and stuff like that, the business tools, surely. I don't know.
Yeah, well, no, the thing with Bing was, of course, that it incorporates the AI in a way that, that others don't.
Yet. Yeah, obviously they want you to switch before Google turns it on.
Before it's so, that is another big fascinating. I mean, that is, I feel like, I think I've said this before somewhere else, that I feel like the whole conversation around AI and adoption of it, has got so many parallels with the adoption of remote work.
Yes, definitely. And the kind of the things that we have to remember about being humans and individuals within that. By the time this goes out, I will have done my keynote at the Nomad World Festival next week. And I was just working on that today about freelancing as a human in an automated world. And it's just been such a strange year for the pace of change in that aspect of technology. And it really does parallel the way that remote and flexible working has exploded. And one would not be possible without the other, let's face it. It's the technology that's supporting all this. We just have to try and find our place alongside it and how to use it and work with it, not be left behind by it, or even worse.
And on that note,
cheery note,
well, it is so exciting. I love how Tammy many times said, it's a great time to basically to be alive. And yes, for some of us, it really, really is. Great. Well, we'd love to hear your thoughts, listeners. I will give you the contact methods again because I'm remembering. So Pilar at virtualnotdistant.com is direct email, and virtualnotdistant.com is the address for the website, where you can also find a contact form, the show notes for all the podcast episodes, and also you can sign up to our monthly newsletter. Many thanks to Ross, who will polish this episode, and to you listeners, as well as lots of increase in technology and increase in remote work jobs. The podcasts on remote work have also increased. So thank you very much for listening. A big thank you to Ross Winter for polishing the audio of this episode. And thank you, listeners, for choosing to listen to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. Remember to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, and you can check out the full show notes over at virtualnotdistant.com/podcasts. Talking of podcasts, we have another show you can listen to, Management Cafe, which you should also be able to find on all podcast apps. I have been Pilar Ortiz. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.